Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Barrett Jones with SP History. Today we are beginning a new mini-series on Robert F. Kennedy, not Jr., but the daddy. Over the years, as I've uh, shared my JFK series with students or anybody, YouTube, whatever, I've repeatedly been asked about Bobby and his assassination, and I've addressed it in passing. Um, but I've never really focused any particular episodes to it. Um, and I've never gotten into the topic other than to say that there are so many similarities between uh, the three assassinations of the 60s that uh, I think are so key in understanding what happened going forward. And that would be obviously JFK, Bobby, and MLK. And then here recently, Trump declassified the documents, not just for JFK, but also for RFK and also for MLK. And so all of a sudden it became a relevant topic again. And I thought it'd be interesting to take a time out from JFK and from the Miami series and all the stuff we've been doing, and, and, and including the Ukraine stuff that we just finished up, and talk about the facts of the Bobby Kennedy case. Um, it's a four-part miniseries. It's not real long, but I think when we finish just the facts of the case and what happened and what some think happened, um, even including some theories about the case at the end, I think you're going to see some striking similarities between what happened in Los Angeles in 68 to what happened in Dallas in 63. And then we're going to do another series at the end of the RFK stuff about Martin Luther King. You know, I've said it so many times, history does not happen in a vacuum. And one of the reasons the CIA fights so hard against the release of any documents, I mean, let's face it, if it were up to the CIA, we wouldn't have access to anything from 64 on. We just have the Warren Report. That's it. They fought the Clay Shaw trial. They fought the House Select Committee. They rat fucked both of them. They when E. Howard Hunt became a liability after Watergate in the Marina Lorenz trial, they washed their hands of him, disavowed him, and claimed no knowledge of anything he'd been involved in. Uh, every time there's any kind of information that drips out or threatens to drip out, they fight it. People turn up missing, dead, documents go missing. I mean, if it were up to them, we'd never know anything. So here we are, 60 some odd years later after JFK and 56, 55 years after Bobby and MLK. And these documents are coming out, and there's still widespread interest in these cases. And I mean, one of the reasons they fight so hard is to protect those methods and sources, especially their methods, because they use the methods over again. And when it's a new generation of people, citizens who maybe don't know their history as well as the previous generation or didn't live through it, it works even better because the new generation thinks, well, that's the first time that ever happened. And when you study history, you find out it's not the first time it happened. This has been happening and happening and happening and happening. So that's the point of this. I want to try to go through the facts of these two cases, Bobby and Martin Luther King, so that if you have been paying any attention at all to the JFK stuff, you'll be able to draw the parallels and see the methods that align from one assassination to the next. And in some cases, even the same people. You know, I've preached and preached and preached the connection between JFK and Watergate. That's 63 to 72. Well, 68's right smack dab in the middle of that time frame. So it just stands to reason. If the same people were involved in 63 and 72, the same people are also going to be involved in 68. So, all right. I call it the Manchurian murder. If you know anything about Manchurian, or if you've seen the movie The Manchurian Candidate, you understand that what that means. It's someone who is set up. He's sort of an empty suit. In the context of a Manchurian candidate, it would be somebody running for president or high office who's really not the power. He's the front, and the power is behind the throne. The power is the in the shadows, and they fronted this uh, socially acceptable or electorate acceptable candidate or person image because they know that if people knew who the real power was, who was behind them pulling the strings, they would never vote for that person. So a Manchurian, anything, is somebody who is sort of a patsy. It's another fancier name to say patsy, who's been set up to do something or take the fall or be something or somebody, but the real power is behind them in the shadows. So we call it the Manchurian murder. I'm going to go through a few sources here that I will be leaning on. And of course, some of these sources I couldn't list all of them because I've drawn from a lot of my JFK source material when learning about Bobby's assassination, especially motive. A lot of it comes from the same source material. But here are some that are unique to Bobby in particular. Obviously, his son. There's been a lot said on his part about what he thinks happened. And a quick listen to Bobby, and he knows name. I'll tell you, the thing about Bobby Kennedy is um, whether he's talking about health and or he's talking about scandal like his daddy or his uncle's assassination, whatever topic he's talking about, he brings a lot to the table in terms of knowledge. He's got a mind like a steel trap. So he remembers everything. And of course, in his position as a Kennedy family member, he's got some inside knowledge, and he's the renegade, right? All the other Kennedys believe the government story, or at least pretend to. He's the only one with the guts to come out and say he doesn't believe it. So I've got, and I put here this particular interview, Vlad, but I've listened to him 100 times on 100 different platforms, speaking about 100 different topics, and included in that mix is a lot of talk about what happened with his father. He did a really interesting interview with Bill Maher, where Bill Maher was extremely skeptical and tried to set him up, make him look like a nut, a conspiracy nut. And Bobby, in a way, only Bobby can do. If you ever listen to Bill Maher, you know that he's going to just wisecrack his way through an interview and try to get you off topic and on his turf, and he'll make you look silly. I've seen him do that. But Kennedy just stayed on topic and just methodically worked his way through the conspiracy and the conspirators and also the evidence. And you could tell Bill Maher didn't know a lot of the evidence. He was just going by what he'd heard, what the government has said, what the conventional wisdom was, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, he lives out there in California where Sirhan, the man accused of killing his daddy, is still in prison to this day. And so but I could go on and on about all these different interviews that Bobby's done, not just to Bill Maher, not just Vlad, so many. He was on Joe Rogan. I think he was on Joe Rogan for 3 hours. If you hear noise in the background, it's my wife. She's coming and going, coming and going. So anyway, he did like a 3 hour interview with Joe Rogan. And you know how those interviews go. It's just a rambling, uh, basically him just going on and on, and Joe Rogan gives him plenty of time and space to tell the story. So it doesn't matter where you hear him. If you hear anything about him talking about his daddy, check it out. There's a lot of facts there that he has right on the tip of his tongue. Another good book, A Lie Too Big to Fail by Lisa Peace. The real history of the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. Um, Obviously, you can tell by the title, the perspective that she's coming from. William Pepper was a valuable source. He's no longer with us. He died, but he was an attorney that was familiar with these kinds of cases. And he represented Martin Luther King and his family in their pursuit of justice against the city of Memphis. And he also represented Sirhan after the fact, of course. And I've heard several talks by William Pepper comparing the assassination of Bobby to Martin Luther King and also to JFK, because the parallel, you'll see, the parallels are just so striking. He's been you can still find his stuff on YouTube. And as far as books are concerned, in addition to Lisa Peace's work, David Talbot wrote a really good book, The Brothers, and a lot of good stuff with respect to motive in particular from that book. Collateral Damage by Mark Shaw, dealing with several high-profile assassinations with Bobby right smack in the middle. Not a not so flattering image of Bobby portrayed by Mark Shaw in the Collateral Image, as you can see just by the picture and the way he's kind of the thesis of his book is that Bobby's at the center of all these other assassinations, and then eventually got assassinated himself by pretty much the same people. So, interesting book, Collateral Damage, and then the assassination of Bobby Kennedy, the conspiracy and the cover-up by Turner and Christian. So, and the forward of that book's by Oliver Stone. So here you see Oliver Stone starting to dip his toe into the water of Bobby Kennedy as well, which he's most known for his movie about JFK. All right, so some facts of the case, and many of these you may know, but some of them you might not know. June 5th, 1968, happy night for Bobby. And if you remember the backstory to how he got into the race for president, he really got kind of dragged into it, kicking and screaming. He didn't want to go against the sitting Democrat president, LBJ. But when LBJ announced that he would not run for, nor would he accept the nomination of his party for another term as president, that famous speech, Bobby decided to throw his hat in the ring because we needed an anti-war candidate. And somebody had a chance of winning. There was already an anti-war candidate. Nobody thought he had a chance of winning. So he thought, well, uh, I don't want to, initially he didn't want to go against party orthodoxy or the party elders and split the party by running in a primary against LBJ. But now that LBJ is getting out, it's wide open. It's kind of interesting if you fast forward that to what happened in this last election cycle. His son actually did run on the Democrat ticket until it was no longer tenable. Then he split off and quit the Democrat Party and ran as an independent. And so, you know, in this case, son took the plunge where father wasn't willing to and decided, I may have to go against the Democrat Party. And maybe that's what 50 years does for a family. The Kennedys were synonymous with the Democrat Party back in 68. And even after the assassination of his brother, he was just not willing to go against the Democrat Party machine. And then when LBJ cleared the way, he decided, okay, I'll run. But he wouldn't have run if LBJ had decided to run one more time. Anyway, so just after midnight, it's the primary out in California, and just after midnight at the Ambassador Hotel, Kennedy has just won the primary out there, which, in that famous speech, he says, now we're on to Chicago. So they're on to Illinois. And of course, Illinois, if you go back a few years, was in 60, was the state that really put his brother over the top and helped him win the general elections in 1960. He's going back to those stomping grounds. This is probably going to be pretty friendly turf for Kennedy. He's just won California, and it's looking like he is going to be the nominee of the Democrat Party. So it's a happy night. This was a big primary to win. And he's thanking his supporters. You see him in the top there. Notice in the background the tall black man right over, as you're looking at the picture, right over Bobby's left shoulder. And then go over to the right of the photograph. In the shadows behind the man with the glasses, you see an outline of a hat there. Um, that is this man at the bottom. His name is Thane Eugene Caesar, and he is a security guard. We'll talk more about him as we go along. And pretty much always in the shadows of Bobby that night, up into and including the moment which he was shot. And he tries to stay out of the pictures, as you'll notice. He's in the shadows, but you can always tell by his hat that that's who that is. Anyway, the other guy is Rosie Greer. He's one of these private individuals who's glommed on to Kennedy and is a friend, and he's providing security. Uh, Interesting that we would begin this discussion about Bobby Kennedy Sr. and his security detail, in as much as this last election cycle, the sitting president, Joe Biden, refused Secret Service protection for Bobby Kennedy Jr. Um, and so Bobby Kennedy Jr. had to do the same thing his dad did in 68, to hire some private security guards to come along and provide him additional security. You get the security automatically once you become the nominee, but you can see Bobby is surrounded by private security types. Rosie Greer, top photo of the black man. There's another one I'm going to introduce you to, Rafer Johnson. These are all private guys, friends of his. And you see Rosie's a big old guy. You know, he's 6'5", 300 pounds, former lineman for the Los Angeles Rams, part of that fearsome foursome. So you're talking about a big, strong fella, right? Uh, Rafer Johnson was a former Olympic decathlete. So, and then you got that private security guard named Thane Eugene Caesar in the background there. And so these are not Secret Service guys, but obviously they're going to play a big role in what happens. Just like they played a big role in what happened in Dallas, and just like they played a big role in what almost happened to Trump this past year in Pennsylvania. You know, my experience has taught me when there's an assassination attempt, first place you look now is the protection detail or lack thereof. Anyway, so uh, he's thanking his supporters, and then the Ambassador Hotel maitre d' named Carl Euchre uh, escorted him. He's standing there next to him, you can see, escorts him through the hotel kitchen to a press conference. Um, Behind him, sort of pressing him forward, is Thane Eugene Caesar, pictured down below here and also in the hat above. He's following Kennedy close behind, and he's holding the senator's right elbow, appearing to guide him as they go through this this area in the kitchen. It's a pantry area. And of course, we all know what happened as Kennedy stopped at the edge of a steam table to shake hands with kitchen workers who were waiting in the area to meet him. Sirhan, who's a 24-year-old Palestinian man, jumped out, opened fire at Kennedy from just several feet in front of him. In some cases, he got as close as a yard. So he's directly in front of Kennedy, point blank range. He just comes out firing. And Kennedy's in that confined space. So after two shots, Euchre, the hotel maitre d', grabs Sirhan's arm. So he lunges forward, grabs Sirhan by the arm, and with the help of these other securities guys, pushed him down on the steam tail and pinned down his gun hand. They couldn't get the gun out of his hand. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they pinned down his gun hand and turned it away from Kennedy so that as Sirhan continued to fire, they were wild shots, but they're all going in the opposite direction of Kennedy. And we know where they went because they injured 5 people. He shot 6 more times, and all 6 of those bullets ended up in somebody's body. One person was shot twice. So we know where all of the 6 bullets after the two initials that went in Kennedy's direction, we know where the other 6 went. And the gun only held 8 bullets. So he's empty. By the time everybody turns back in the direction of Kennedy and looks at him, he's lying there on the floor dying. And of course, he dies 26 hours later. Famous picture there, top left. Kennedy in distress, obviously laying on the floor, mortally wounded. Top right, uh, the only remaining picture I have ever found of the tussle in the pantry of the men trying to take down uh, Sirhan. And then the famous headline of the Daily Mirror, God, not again. If you remember the JFK movie, Jim Garrison's wife, it was very skeptical of her husband's theory that JFK was killed by the government, by CIA. And in fact, they get in these fights, and it doesn't show it to, well, it does show it in the movie. She's leaving. She's leaving him over it. She's lost all her friends, right? Her life's been turned upside down because her husband is accusing the government of murdering the president. She's just furious about it. So she's leaving. And then Bobby gets shot. And he wakes her up one night before and to tell her they shot Bobby. And it's like a light bulb just goes off in her mind. In that movie, she goes, "Oh my God, you're right. They did do it. Now they took it. Now they killed his brother." It's a sort of poignant moment in the movie where somebody very skeptical and angry about what this theory that her husband's been chasing has done to her life. It's like the scales just came off her eyes. All of a sudden, realized after the second one, it's true. It's true what you've been saying all this time. And of course, at the end, she actually brings her son to watch her husband give the closing arguments and stuff at the trial. And it sort of shows the journey of the skeptic from not believing it to having that moment where you all of a sudden realize it to now wanting to pass down that truth to the next generation, to your kids. So uh, those are just some basic facts. Everybody thought this was going to be an open shut case because when you walked into the pantry and Sirhan turns around and starts firing at Kennedy, and Kennedy is lying or dead, it's pretty clear what happened. Everybody saw Sirhan firing at Kennedy. It's all right. No one's done the ballistics yet. No one's looked at any of the evidence. They just saw what they saw. And then at his trial, Sirhan confessed. He confessed at his trial to ambushing Bobby at the Ambassador Hotel kitchen. He said, quote, "I killed Robert Kennedy willfully, premeditatively, with 20 years of malice aforethought," which is an interesting little add in there because he's only 24 years old. So the question is, you've been planning this since you were age 4? That's an interesting little add in there. And uh, but it's almost like the overkill, right? Of all those, we talked about this in the JFK case, all those doppelgangers run around Dallas and how they overdid it. And there were doppelgangers on top of doppelgangers, while the real guys got work records to prove he was at work. And they were running into problems later. Too many doppelgangers. they uh, and some of them weren't even, like the one in Mexico City had no resemblance to Lee Harvey Oswald. But they're all using his name. Too eager, too over eager to set up Oswald. Well, here you got a confession that looks a little bit suspicious to me because using that, throwing in that last sentence with 20 years of malice aforethought. If this was a 50-year-old man, it'd be one thing. This is a 24-year-old kid. Now, this confession came after days that Sirhan was pleading with the judge to let him fire his attorney because he felt like he was being represented well. We'll talk about that coming up. But the judge kept refusing his request. And so Sirhan was left with no options. And then he made this confession. Anyway, there were 77 witnesses who the government pulled in that the defense stipulated would all say the same thing. Sirhan did it. So it looks at the outset like it's a slam dunk case. Here you see a picture of Sirhan being led away. And then there's a picture down there of him, sort of a contemplative photo of him at his trial. And you can see how young he is. And you also notice how little he is. He's a very little fella, 5'5", not much more than 100 pounds. This is a little guy, okay? And you can see everybody that surrounds him is bigger than him, whether they're average height or tall or big, whatever. They're all bigger than he is. He's just a little fella. One of the first things you have to do in any of these cases, motive means opportunity, right? Motive. What's the motive? And when he was arrested, there was a newspaper clipping in his pocket, which criticized Bobby's campaign pledge to sell jet bombers to Israel. This was after the Arab-Israeli War, and they had lost some jets in that war, and they were buying some jets from the Americans, and Bobby said that he would sell them to. Of course, he's a Palestinian, so it was pretty clear that if you're a Palestinian, you're against anything. It's pro-Israel, or anybody who's pro-Israel. So boom, that's your motive. And then they go to his house and they search his bedroom, and they find in a notebook where he has handwritten, and I've put a picture there of the notebook and what he wrote. Repetitions of the same phrase over and over. RFK must die. RFK must be assassinated by June 5th, 1968. Again, going overboard with a detail. The first one in the confession, he says, I've been planning this since I was 4 years old. And that would cause me to be suspicious, knowing what I know already about these sorts of cases. And now he's saying a specific date that RFK must be assassinated, June 5th, 1968, which of course is the day he was assassinated, or the day he was shot. And you can see he's written this on May 18th at 9:45 a.m., 1968. So that's only a couple weeks earlier. And he's saying by June 5th, he has to be gone. Now look at the repetitive writing, or this sometimes has been referred to as automatic writing in Sirhan's notebook. Now, the prosecution used this as evidence to show that he was a cold, callous, premeditating predator, so to speak. But interestingly, Sirhan, when presented with this evidence, has no memory of writing that, nor does he have any memory of the shooting itself, which is extremely interesting. And maybe in 68, before the church hearings, people would be it would be okay to not understand the larger implications. But after the church hearings, uh, that's got to cause pause in some people's minds, at least, that this was something at work that was much larger than Sirhan. In fact, Sirhan's just the Manchurian, the patsy in this whole thing. But, this is 68. So, but you notice the automatic or the repetitive, right? RFK must die. RFK must be killed. RFK must be assassinated. 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 I mean, you just go on and on. It's just that. And then it keeps throwing in there June 5th, 68. RFK must be assassinated. And on it goes. There's just something really fishy about this, right? It's like when Lee Harvey Oswald, his Ruth Payne's house was searched. In the garage, they find order slips for a Mannlicher Carcano from Chicago sporting goods store, Klein sporting goods store, and it's got the picture, and it's got a circle where he circled it, and also the 22 at the bottom, same thing, a circle. And then they find PO address to which these guns are going to be sent, and they find out it's his PO address. So it matches up with an ID in his pocket. I mean, it's just too easy. It's too clean. It's too neat. The interesting thing about this, another detail, which makes you think this has been concocted by somebody else. How is it possible for Sirhan to have written this very incriminating page on May 18th when it wasn't until May 20th that Kennedy ever made a campaign speech talking about sending bombers to Israel? He wrote this 2 days before Kennedy said anything about bombers to Israel. And that's the article that was in his pocket to explain the motive, which ties back to this notebook, RFK Must Die, by June 5th, 1968. And he wrote this on May 18th, and RFK never even talked about doing anything, selling bombers to Israel until May 20th. Again, it smacks of somebody trying to put together a cover story in advance to drop it after the crime, but getting a few key details wrong. This is what a good defense attorney, remember, he's trying to get rid of his defense attorney because his defense attorney's not bringing any of this up. All right, that brings us to the autopsy. This is what RFK Jr. talks about. This is where he goes first. He zeroes in on this because this shows conclusively that the assassination could not have come, or the fatal bullets at least could not have been fired by Sirhan from his gun. So that opens the door to the question, well, if he didn't do it, who did? So Thomas Noguchi, this is he's known as the corner of the stars. He did Marilyn Monroe and lots of famous people. And when he was assigned to do this medical exam, RFK, first thing he thought of was Dallas. And of course, if you know anything about Dallas, you know that autopsy was just butchered. It was just awful, and it's opened the door to all kinds of conspiracy theories, if you want to use that term. And of course, it was intentionally sloppy because they had a lot of evidence to hide and a lot of evidence to cover up. They could not have an honest autopsy down in Texas, so they kidnapped the body, took it back to Bethesda and Washington, had these two flunkies do it under the watchful guidance of all these military types right there in the medical exam room. And then they burned all their notes and didn't release, the photos and right, all the pictures from X-rays, etc. So it's just a mess. And so he said, all right, if I'm going to do this autopsy, it's not going to be like Dallas. I am going to perform the perfect autopsy. And so he invites to witness him doing this autopsy all the coroners, the chief coroners of every branch of the military, and then other notable coroners from the private sector to sit up in the surgery theater and observe this autopsy. This is going to be the most transparent autopsy ever performed. And indeed, it was labeled the perfect autopsy. Followed every procedure to the T. It was very transparent. All these wise heads above him watching, signing off on it. And so this has not got the stink of a rigged autopsy like Dallas had. So this is a very major point to be made. And Bobby makes a big point of this, saying, listen, this is credible. Okay. First of all, the guy who's doing it is extremely credible. He's done gunshot wounds. I mean, he's done thousands of these things. The two that did the autopsy of my uncle, talking about JFK, had never performed a gunshot autopsy before. They were literally two flunkies from the Navy, guys that could be told what to do. This guy is not inviting all these experts to sit in to tell him what to do, but to observe and report later what they saw, so that this transparency will inspire confidence in the process. So, first of all, these are not autopsies. There's nothing similar about the autopsy for JFK as compared to the autopsy of Bobby Kennedy. One was legit, the other wasn't. So what were the findings of Thomas Noguchi? First, he found that 3 bullets that entered Kennedy's body were fired from behind him at close range. Right there, you got a problem. First of all, 3 bullets. We know, according to what the witnesses saw, and we're going to find out, it's going to be corroborated by the autopsy, that Sirhan, who was always in front of Bobby, only got 2 shots off aimed at Bobby. The other 6, we know where they are because they're in other people's bodies. Remember, 5 injured people, one of which had been injured twice. So that only leaves 2 bullets. He only had 8 in the chamber. Now here's 3 bullets that entered Kennedy's body. So there, oh, okay, well, let's just assume 2 of them came from Sirhan because he got 2 off. That means somebody else fired that 3rd shot because it could have been Sirhan. So there you have a problem. And the second problem, if you're paying close attention, is that according to Noguchi, the bullets that entered Kennedy's body were fired from behind him at close range. RFK Jr. was never, or Sirhan was never behind RFK Jr. or RFK. He was always facing him. He walked into the kitchen, into the ambush, and he got 2 shots off it, and he was tackled. So he was always in front of him. So in this first finding, you have big time problems with the story. The fatal shot was fired from approximately 1 to 3 inches behind Kennedy's right ear, and it penetrated his brain. Here's a drawing, and you can see there at his right ear the entrance and then the damage it caused as it entered the brain. And 2 different perspectives there. So there were 3 shots that hit RFK, all from behind, and the fatal shot was like an execution style shot from behind his right ear. Literally, that's how they execute people. And so, boom, we got some problems here. Continuing on, more findings from Noguchi. The 4 shots that struck, you say, well, the 4 shots? What are 4? I thought you said 3 shots that fired. Well, there were 4 shots that struck Bobby from behind. They were all, I'll explain that in just a minute. They were contact shots. Contact shots mean the barrel of the gun was either touching his skin or his clothing, and it left carbon tattoos on Bobby's, either his clothing or his body, his flesh. 4 shots struck Bobby from behind. 3 of them, now let's go back. I want to make sure you understand this. The 3 bullets that entered Kennedy's body were fired behind him from close range. All right. So 3 bullets entered his body, 4 shots struck him from behind, meaning 1 of them didn't enter his body. Okay. That's the distinction here. There were 4 shots fired at Bobby from behind. 3 of them entered his body. 1 of them was the fatal shot behind the ear. 1 of them did not enter his body. We'll get to that in a second. But they were all at such close range that they left carbon tattoos on either his clothing or his skin. All of the 4 shots, the trajectory was upward, meaning the assailant was not aiming straight at him, but was behind him with the gun shooting from behind execution style, which means he had it kind of close to his body and he was holding the gun up against him and he was aiming up. That's a common trait of an execution style hit. The trajectory is almost always upward. Whereas if you're firing at somebody coming at you, the trajectory is flat. None of these, the trajectory of these 4 shots that from behind, none of the trajectory was flat. They were all upward. Okay, continuing on. Noguchi said that 2 other bullets entered his right armpit. Okay, so this answers the question, remember 4 bullets were fired from behind. 3 of them hit him. So here they are. There's the arrow to the one behind the right ear, and there's the 2 that went into his right armpit. All right. The 4th went through the shoulder pad of his jacket. So it didn't injure him in any way. It just went through the shoulder pad. But again, it was from behind. Noguchi later stated that he believed the 5th shot was the one that killed Kennedy. All right, so if you're counting, you know that Sirhan fired twice at Kennedy. And so far as the autopsy shows, none of them hit Kennedy because there's not any evidence of a shot hitting him from the front. Then he fired 6 more in an opposite direction when his hand was pinned down. He injured 5 people, one of them twice. So the only bullets in question from Sirhan's guns as to what they hit are those first 2 shots. We know what happened with the other 6 shots. And according to Noguchi, since he was in front, the question is, who did he hit with those 2 that he fired at him, because he didn't hit RFK? And that leads you to the next question. Who's the guy behind RFK shooting at him at close range, such close range he's leaving carbon tattoos on his skin and his clothing, at an upward angle, which indicates somebody is pressing the gun up against him, holding it down to conceal it, and firing up. and getting him in the head, getting him in the armpit twice, and then missing by shooting through his jacket, the shoulder pad of his jacket. So that's 4 shots. So if you add the 8 to the 4, that's 12 shots total going on in this room. All right. And according to Gucci, he believes it was, if you were doing a chronological uh, lineup of all these shots or arrangement of these shots, it was the fifth one that got him behind the ear. Wasn't the first, wasn't the second. It was the fifth. So 4 shots happened before RFK got he's going to survive these armpit shots. The headshot was obviously not survivable. The conclusion that Noguchi reached is that since RFK's security team had grabbed Sirhan's firing hand after the second shot and pinned his arm to the table in front of him, in front of Kennedy, Sirhan could have not have fired that fifth and fatal shot because the fifth and fatal shot was fired from behind at point blank range. So for a couple of reasons. First of all, Sirhan's not behind him, and second of all, he's not close enough to put the muzzle of the gun against RFK's skin and fire. He was tackled several feet away. So if you just go by the autopsy alone, you've got issues with the story that Sirhan acted alone and killed Bobby Kennedy. Then you get into the witnesses. Everybody saw, and here I've got an outline of an image of what the kitchen looked like. So you can see the embassy room and the podium there, which is where Kennedy was speaking. If you look at that arrow in the front, that's where he was supposed to go. That was the originally planned route. So it would have taken him out through the front of the embassy room into a corridor, into a colonial room where he was going to have a press conference. All right. But at the last minute, Thane Eugene Caesar and the maitre d' takes him off the back of the podium through the pantry doors into this kitchen area where you can see it's a long rectangular serving kitchen at the end of it there, and you got a serving table and an ice machine. And he walks in there and has all these people shake his hand, and he gets right in the middle there and gets shot. And there's the gunman who pops out from behind the ice machine, and that's so I guess what they were going to do is lead him through the pantry into the serving kitchen, out through. There's no exit if you continue straight, so you'd have to make a right-hand turn, end up in that exact same corridor where he was originally going to be, and then quick make a U-turn into the colonial room. This was a setup, just like the last-minute change to JFK's motorcade route. He was supposed to go straight on Main Street right out to the Stemmons Freeway. At the last minute, they add 2 turns to Houston and onto Elm, and if you can't bring the shooter to the target, you bring the target to the shooter. So in both Kennedy cases, the last minute, the route was changed to bring the target to the shooter. In this case, he's hiding in the serving kitchen area, the pantry. According to the witness, Sirhan was always in front of RFK facing him. He was never behind him. So that being the case, he can't have fired the fatal shot, which was fired from behind it. Is right. None of the 4 shots that hit Kennedy, including the one that went through his jacket, the pad of his shoulder pad. None of those 4 shots that hit. In other words, none of the 2 shots that he got off in facing Kennedy, none of those hit him. So Sirhan fired 8 shots, hit 5 people, but none of which was RFK, and he's still in California serving a prison term for the murder of. And that's just going through the autopsy and now the testimony. When the shooting started, witnesses saw Paul Schrade fall before Kennedy ever fell. Remember, Kennedy doesn't get hit with a fatal shot until shot 5. Paul Schrade fell immediately, suggesting that he was walking behind Kennedy. And so we're still trying to figure out who did Sirhan's bullets hit. Well, starting to look like the first bullet he fired was missed Kennedy and hit Paul Schrade. And that was what the witnesses concluded because he fell so quick. So it was either the first or the second shot. Paul Schrade, the UAW union executive, who was, he was part of the entourage escorting RFK. He's the first one to be hit. Going on with the witnesses, after firing the first two shots in RFK's direction, all the witnesses saw what I've already reported on, and that is that the six-man security team that was escorting by jumped on top of Sirhan, preventing him from continuing to fire in RFK's direction. One of these was Rayford Johnson. This guy's a 6'3", 200-pound, 1960 Olympic gold medalist in the decathlon. Now, if you know anything about these events, you understand that decathlon, you got to be not just a good sprinter or a good jumper or this or that. You got to be good in everything because you're doing 10 events and they take the composite score, and whoever gets the highest, you're the gold medalist. This guy was a Olympic gold medalist, strong, all muscle. Rosie Greer, the other guy I showed you, the 6'5", 200, almost 300-pound former All-Pro NFL defensive lineman, played for the Rams in the 60s. Johnson said later that the 5'5", 120-pound Sirhan, this little wisp of a man, had, quote, superhuman strength. He said we couldn't get the gun out of his hand, which is why we smashed it down on the steam table and turned it away. He just continued firing, but we couldn't get the gun out of his hand. So we tried to turn it away from RFK, and of course, right into the, 5 other people got hit. But that is a very important detail that will come up later that you need to remember, file away in the old memory bank. How and why is this 5'5" Palestinian man who's not an athlete, who doesn't lift weights, doesn't have any record of, doesn't look like a strong guy. If you meet him, Bobby Kennedy has met him, Jr. He's met him, and he's just, this guy's this tiny little fella. How in the world did he have superhuman strength to the degree that he could resist these 6 security ties, these big, strong guys? And I've just listed these 2, but there were 4 others that are trying to get that gun out of his hand. They can't get it out of his hand, so they just smash it against the steam tail and turn it the opposite direction. They literally bent him backwards over the steam table. He's bending. He was in front of the steam table. They bent him backwards, grabbed his arm, and couldn't get the gun out of his hand. And here's the summary, as reported by the FBI, saying essentially the same thing I just said. So here's some pictures. Rayford Johnson's the guy on the left. You can tell he's a big, that's an athlete. And then, Rosie Greer, that looks like a lineman. How in the world could one of these guys not get the gun out of Sirhan's hand, let alone 2 of them? And but they couldn't. They couldn't. And that's why he was able to fire off all 8 shots. So how about some of the evidence? This is stuff that any competent attorney, defense attorney, would present at trial, and you'd immediately have problems with the government case. But none of this gets presented, as we'll find out later. Okay, the alleged assassin did fire once they got their hands on the gun. They realized that he fired all 8 shots from his 22. And of course, we know the last 6 where they ended up. The question is, where did the first 2 end up? Because we know that before anyone could get their hands on him, he fired 2 shots in the direction of Bobby. The first shot missed Bobby. Now this is what we're gonna learn from ballistics, is that the first shot missed Bobby but hit Paul Schrade in the head. Now that lines up with what the witnesses said. Remember, the witnesses said Paul Schrade was hit before Bobby. Paul Schrade fell before Bobby. So that stands to reason that one of these first 2 shots, and the ballistics says it was the first shot, because they found the second shot. The second shot struck the door jamb behind RFK. And the LAPD actually removed the door jamb to that had the bullets embedded in it. So then the gun fires 6 more times, injuring 5 people, 1 person twice. So now we know, without beyond a shadow of a doubt, according to ballistics evidence, what happened to all 8 shots that came from Sirhan's gun. The first hit Paul Schrade right in the head. The second, they found the bullet in the door jamb. And the reason they know that those two, they found the 22 slug in Paul Schrade's head. They found the 22 slug in the door jamb. And those 2 bullets came from Sirhan's gun. So we now know what happened to those first 2 shots. Then they found that those 22 slugs in 5 other people when his hand gets forced back and he's firing in the opposite direction. One of them had 2 of them in him, two of the slugs. So you add them up. It's just math. 2, 6 equals 8. How many bullets does Sirhan's gun hold? 8. He didn't have a second gun. So the conclusion is none of Sirhan's 8 shots hit RFK. And once you come to that conclusion, okay, there's got to be another story because, as we've already learned, 4 shots hit Bobby from behind. 2 of them in the armpit, 1 behind the ear, and 1 went through the shoulder pad of his suit. That's 12 shots. Sirhan's gun only holds 8. Somebody was, and he was always facing Bobby. Somebody was behind Bobby shooting at Bobby, and everyone was paying attention to Sirhan, which again speaks to me of intelligence because that's the strategy that always use. Set somebody up to be the distraction, to be the patsy. Everyone's attention is focused on the distraction, and the kill shot comes from somewhere else, right? In Dallas, the distraction was the Texas School Book Depository. The kill shot, and Lee Harvey Oswald, the kill shot was this grassy knoll, right? In Memphis, the distraction was the flop house across the street from the Lorraine Hotel. And while everyone's pointing in the direction of the flop house, the kill shot comes from the fire station across the street on the other side. Here we are in LA, and everyone's looking at Sirhan. He's making a big show of it, and everyone's tackling him, and they're witnessing what they're witnessing and assuming when they see Bobby down that Sirhan shot him, not realizing that the kill shot came from behind Bobby. So that's episode 1, and just setting the table for what is to come. That's the stuff a competent defense attorney should have started with, just to, because none of it is circumstantial. None of it is solely dependent upon the testimony of a witness. It's the ballistics evidence. It's the autopsy evidence, right? The stuff that we didn't get in the JFK case. It's one of the frustrating things about the whole thing is, okay, in the JFK case, a lot of the evidence we haven't learned, until decades later to dispute the original findings of the Warren Commission. You can almost forgive people for believing the Warren Commission because they so controlled the flow of evidence to the FBI. In this case, they couldn't. And the evidence was right there for everybody to see, including the autopsy report. The autopsy report that came out as a result of the Warren JFK was rigged, and so it backed up the Warren Commission. But this autopsy was done legitimate. But everything that happens in trial afterwards is not legitimate. He said, how in the world could they convict this guy when the ballistics evidence shows it couldn't have been him? When the autopsy evidence shows it couldn't have been him? When the testimony from the witnesses says it couldn't have been him? And why did he confess to it? And what's this deal with him having no memory of writing on that notebook or shooting anybody? And what's this deal about him having this superhuman strength? What in the world is going on here? All right, we'll start getting into that in episode 2. Hope everybody has a great day. Until next time, God bless. Thank you.